Dobar dan i dobrodošli na Netokraciju, novu konferenciju Future of Work. U travnju smo pričali o tome kako nam izgleda budućnost rada, potaknuta naravno svim promjenama koje je donijela pandemija koronavirusa na način na koji radimo, kada radimo, gdje radimo i tako dalje, pa smo tada pričali o hibridnom modelu rada. Međutim, danas idemo korak dalje, iako se možda kao asinkroni način rada čini kao samo jedan korak, zapravo može biti barem jednu svjetlosnu godinu daleko od povremenog rada od kuće. No, to je nešto što nas vrlo vjerojatno čeka, jer kako smo jučer napisali u našem najavnom članku za ovu konferenciju, 76% zaposlenika želi fleksibilnost za to gdje rade, a 93% želi fleksibilnost kada rade. Riječ je o istraživanju koje je ljetos provedeno na 10.569 zaposlenika u SAD-u, Australiji, Francuskoj, Njemačkoj, Japanu i Velikoj Britaniji, a spremni mi na to ili ne, asinkroni rad nam kuca na vrata. Što zapravo znači asinkroni način rada? To znači da ne morate u realnom vremenu odgovarati na pozive, poruke, sastanke, odnosno vaš radi dan nije isprekidan time, nego radite u periodu kada ste najproduktivniji. Neki od nas su jutarnji tipovi, neki večernji, nekima više odgovara da rascjepkaju posao kroz dan u određenim fazama. Manje se troši vremena na sastanke, a vrijeme za rad, kao što sam spomenula, nije ispresjecano pozivima i porukama koji zahtijevaju istovremenu reakciju. Imamo naravno više vremena za misaoni rad, kreativni rad i možda ono što je najvažnije, što zapravo mnoge tvrtke i potakne na ovakav način rada, je lakši rad u različitim vremenskim zonama. Bilo da imate radnike na raznim dijelovima svijeta ili klijente i druge suradnike. No, naravno, takav rad ne dolazi bez izazova. Kao što sam spomenula, možda se to čini kao logičan korak dalje nakon što smo naučili kako raditi od kuće na daljinu i kombinirati to s radom u uredu, no potrebna je poprilična promjena i mindseta i procesa i alata da bi se došlo do pravog asinkronog rada. To je jedan od prvih izazova, upravo koji su to alati, kako ih koristiti. Ako koristite Slack ili druge alate za komunikaciju, vjerojatno se to pretvorilo u komunikaciju u stvarnom vremenu, što je, kako se kaže, i blagoslov i prokletstvo na jedan način. Zato treba naučiti radnike da koriste alate za asinkron način rada na način na koji su oni zamišljeni, a da se to ne bi pretvorilo u kontinuiranu konverzaciju. Kada razmišljamo o tome hoćemo li uvesti asinkroni način rada, hoćemo li to uvesti odjednom ili postupno ili samo određene odjele ili sve, koliko vremena treba dati cijelom timu da se prilagodi na taj novi način rada, kako im podršku osigurati, tko treba predlagati i uvoditi ovaj način rada, može li menadžment dobro procijeniti želje i mogućnosti zaposlenika, kako im u tome pomoći. To su sve neka od pitanja koja se logično postavljaju kada se priča o ovakvom načinu rada, a mi ćemo pokušati na neka od njih i odgovoriti i postaviti. A prvo pitanje, upravo ono koje sam prvo postavila, je a tiče se alata, koje alate koristiti za asinkronu komunikaciju, kako ih koristiti, a mislim da jedna od glavnih osoba koja može pričati na tu temu je netko koji je stvorio neke od tih alata, pa ću ja pozvati našeg prvog predavača, Amira Salihefendića, CEO Doista i Doista, alata koji omogućuju asinkronu komunikaciju, da se javi. Dobro jutro, Amire.
Dobro jutro, Mija.
Kako si ovo jutro?
Dobro. Uvijek imam 3 djece, tako da je uvijek malo s akcijama ujutru. Da.
To je prvo pitanje koje sam ti htjela postaviti. Je li jutarnji period uopće vrijeme kada ti najviše radiš ili kako si rasporediš rad tijekom dana?
Da, to je dobro pitanje. Ja mislim ima sa djecom i bez djece. Bez djece je bilo vrlo produktivno, a sada isto već imamo strukturu i ovu rutinu, tako da ja mislim oko 9 počinje rad i tu je možda sam najviše produktivan. Ja mislim isto ovo uvijek je bitno energiju gledat nego vrijeme.
Da. S obzirom da je sad 9:05, znači tebi je vrijeme za rad, ja ću ti propustiti da kreneš sa svojim predavanjem, a mi se onda čujemo nakon njega sa nekim dodatnim pitanjima. Izvoli.
Vraću introdukciju na našem i onda ću prebaciti na engleski. Mislim da će biti puno bolje. jer kad počnem tehničke terme, bude veliki problem. Ok, prezentacija zove The Async First Way to Work and Live. I samo mala introdukcija da znate šta ja radim i ko sam ja. Ja sam rođen u Jajcu, 85. I kad sam imao možda 5-6 godina radi rata smo ošli u Dansku i odrastao sam u Danskoj. Zato fački, bosanski, hrvatski, koji, kako zovemo taj jezik, nije baš moj najbolji jezik. Ali i brat mi još dole živi, tako da još imam konekciju sa Balkanom i sa Bosnom. I ne znam jeste ikad bili u Jajcu, ali je predivan grad, ima puno istorije i svašta nešto. Prije jedno 10 godina sam startovao Doist. Doist je kompanija, imamo oko 100 ljudi i mi smo faktički bili remote first iz starta. Znači, već radimo ovo više nego 10 godina. I imamo ljude u preko 39 zemalja i preko 10 time zona. Znači, fully distributed odmah iz početka. I isto nešto što smo vidjeli, to je da u početku kad startuješ rad remote, šta oprobavaš, to je da uzmeš office environment i da ga samo staviš virtualno i digitalno. I to dosta puta ne radi, specijalno ako hoćeš da kolaboriraš preko time zona. I tako da smo mi isto pravimo tools i isto smo imali blog što je već milioni ljudi čitalo, gdje isto dijelimo kako treba se raditi remote ili kako mi mislimo kako se treba raditi remote i isto productivity i svašta nešto. To je mala introdukcija. Ovo su gdje mi radimo. Nešto što je čudno, to je mi plaćamo faktički ljudima office, znači mogu otići i raditi iz coworka, iz ofisa, ali ja mislim 15% ljudi radi od kući i ja radim od kući. Tako da je to malo čudno. Znači ako daneš ljudima opciju da rade iz ofisa, oni faktički ne bi volili raditi iz ofisa. I ovo je vamo, u ovom čošku je moj radni stol stavim. Ok, isto ova slika sa bebom, to je malo, inače ako ima beba u radnom mjestu nije baš dobro. Ok, mi imamo dva produkta. Jedan je Doist, što je možda jedan najveći to-do appova na svijetu. Imamo preko 25 milijuna korisnika. I sada, znači zadnjih par godina smo investirali puno u Twist, što je faktički asynchronous messaging tool. I prije 2 dana smo imali veliku launch nove verzije od Twista. I faktički sad se prebaciti na engleski, jer ja mislim da će biti puno bolji. Ok, isto ima par, ne znam da li znate Doist, ali to je basically to-do app gdje imaš projekte, imaš tasks i imamo support na svim platformima. I ova je mala slika Twista. Twist je asynchronous team messaging tool. Možeš misliti nešto između e-maila i Slacka i gdje optimiramo za asynchronous workflows. Znači, recimo nemamo, ne možeš vidjeti je li neko online, ne možeš vidjeti je li neko video poruku ili ne, i o tome ću malo više pričati, ali možete, znači, pogled poslije Doist Twist da vidite šta mi radimo. So, something that we found out while we worked on the, so to give you some context of how we actually ended up in the asynchronous way, because initially we were actually not there. So we were like one of the first adopters of Slack, and we tried to use it for about a year, but we quickly found out that real-time messaging and chat does not really scale that well. And then like the whole culture inside the company was really bad. Like we were really stressed, and especially as we grew to maybe 40, 50 people, it was just like chaos. What we found out is kind of like we wanted to have a better way to work. And if you look at most of the tools, so for instance, like Microsoft Teams or Atlassian Stride or like even Zoom, they all are optimizing for real-time communication. So as Mia said in the intro, what asynchronous work is, the concept is really simple. It's kind of like you send a message and you don't expect response right away. The concept is really simple, but like mastering it is quite difficult. And also there's all kinds of benefits of asynchronous work that we'll get into. But like the whole concept is kind of like moving away from like real-time communication, like expecting answers right away or responses right away, and moving also like away from meetings as the like primary source of communication. And something we also found out is that you can't really do only asynchronous. So like when we say like asynchronous first, it doesn't mean like only asynchronous, because like we have also tried that, like, in our like decade of working, we have tried to mostly do stuff asynchronous, like without almost no meetings. And, you lose like the human touch and human connection by doing that. So I think like you actually need to have it as a default, like asynchronous as a default, but you still need to sprinkle in like meetings, for instance, one-on-ones with people. You need still to meet people, in real life, like do fun stuff together, like eat a dinner together, because that's how you kind of bond. But most of the stuff that we do, so for instance, like a stand-up meeting, like that should not be a meeting. Like it can just be a thread where you share like what you're going to do and what you have done. And also something to note is like both remote and asynchronous. The pandemic has kind of like accelerated this, but even actually before the pandemic, there was kind of like a really like a rise in remote work and asynchronous work as well. And Raj from Harvard, he did some studies, and he is still doing some studies. And what most studies state is kind of like remote is actually a more productive way to work. And asynchronous as well. Like if you do like scientific studies on productivity, and of course like productivity can be many things, it's very hard to define. But in general, like this notion that remote is kind of like less productive way of working is kind of like a hoax. But I think also like what I see is also like there's many different ways of doing remote work, and most people are actually doing it wrong from our side. Because like most people, what they've done is kind of like the pandemic hit, and then they kind of scrambled together, and they're based like, it's a wild west of like stuff that people do. And most of it is kind of like taking bad practices from an office environment and putting it into a remote setting. I think like in order for us to actually make remote work really productive and asynchronous work as well, like we really need to invent like new processes and new like tools that are kind of optimized for this new environment. And also something to know as well is like before the pandemic, and even right now, like there are not many companies in the world that are async first. And those that have maybe over 50 employees, there's probably only a handful of them. This said, those that are like, I think are quite special companies. So for instance, like Zapier, I'm not sure how many of you know Zapier. I think like it's valued at like 5 billion, and they have like a lot of revenues as well, a lot of usage, and they're doing some cool stuff on automation side. Help Scout, it's kind of like Zendesk, a more modern version. They're also like fully asynchronous and remote. GitLab will just go public, also like at $1 billion valuation. And GitLab is kind of like, I think 1,400 people. So you really have like people like Doist is like 100 people. Zapier is about 400. Help Scout, I think it's also 100, 150. GitLab is like over 1,000. And then you also have like some smaller companies like Wildbit. I think they are probably 20, 30 people. So, it's kind of like still a niche, but it's a powerful niche. And you also can have like some real examples that this can work like in a small company, in a medium company, and in a big company. And it scales really well. And actually, like you can visit weareasync.com to kind of like read more about like these companies that practice this. So also something to note is I think like how we view the stack of communication. So we have like this pyramid, and what I said before is like async first does not mean async only. So this is like our stack, like inside a company, how we have it. Like we have Twist at the bottom, where we basically have like a lot of like just text-based communication. Like some people use like email here at the bottom. We use Twist, but basically you can kind of have like announcement, ideas, inspiration, blah blah blah. And then you also have some tools. So like Doist is can be used in an asynchronous way. GitHub, like developers love to use that. Dropbox and etc. And then on top of that, like, and then the pyramid also gets smaller. So like that means that we use less of like these meetings tools. And then we still do like annual retreats where we gather everybody together. Team also, like the different teams inside Doist also do their own retreats. And then on the top, we have like a Telegram group for the whole company where people, can just like message when something like looks off. For instance, like the site is down. And we also have like contact. So like we can call people if, something is like off or down. What is the problem? It's kind of like if your communication stack is kind of like flipped off. So you have like synchronous at the bottom. So it would be like meetings and Slack kind of as a primary way to communicate. Then you maybe have like some emails or like some Notion documents at the top. Like that is the typical stack we see here. But we think actually the asynchronous stack and like having asynchronous at the bottom as kind of like the primary way to communicate, it's a much better thing. So I will kind of like tell you why, like what have you learned actually over the years doing this. So first of all, like in an asynchronous first culture, you have very few meetings. So this is actually like my weekly like schedule, which looks very, very off, but I have like only a few meetings per week. And what we have seen like in the pandemic is basically that people are just like in Zoom calls from like 9 to 5 or even like, all day long. And, this is just like, for me, like having some Zoom calls is okay, but like being stuck all day in Zoom calls, like it's really draining. And thus, like, I don't think we are producing anything in most of these calls. So it's just like, if you look at the cost, it's like really, really high. So what we have seen, like, with the growth of like Zoom is basically that most people have basically scrambled together and are just like having a lot of meetings. And also if you just like look at the studies of like efficiency and productivity, like, being stuck in meetings all day long, it's not really the best way to get results done. This is like a huge benefit. And this also means, I have like a lot of time to just like think creatively. I can also, go in and like play football like on a Tuesday in the middle of the day, or just like hang out with my kids. I have like a lot of flexibility in my schedule, and this is like kind of a super weapon of asynchronous. Another thing that I think is like really critical. I will just take a sip of coffee. Another thing that's super critical, and I think like GitLab is like the champions on this, is like handbook. So like GitLab, I think you should see their handbook. I think it's like 10,000 pages long. They document everything, like how their salary comp are structured. You can actually learn a lot by just going there. So like if you have any issue or like any problem inside a company, you want to like, I don't know, like see how you want to do like remote salaries, then you can just go to GitLab's public handbook. So for this, like we also have our handbook. We started this very late. So like if you're going asynchronous first or even like remote first, like create a handbook, document stuff, like make that part of the culture that you document stuff. Because what that does is kind of like it unblocks people. So if people are stuck, and they are like, they can also just answer questions without like pinging anybody. So in our company, like we document like product specs, engineering like specs, like core value stuff, people ops stuff, finance stuff, like everything just gets thrown into there. And then we make it searchable as well. So, the difference, I think, between like a curated handbook versus like just having Google Docs is that for us, like our handbook is kind of like versioned. I don't think you need to have it versioned, but the basic thing is like you need to see this as kind of like a more permanent knowledge of the company, and you need to update it as well. Because like, if you have like some docs that nobody really updates or sees or uses, like they are going to get outdated very fast. So that is a very important one. Another thing is basically like, not having chat. So like real-time chat where people need to be online to communicate, like, again, like that goes against like the asynchronous way. And this is like why we use Twist for this. So in Twist, it's basically like optimized towards like asynchronous workflows where, like I can consume the content when I want it. Like I'm not really pressured to respond now. So this means like I can batch stuff, I can, for instance, like work, like write or develop during the morning, and then I process Twist in batches and etc. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility here. And especially, like my background is like in computer science. So focus and deep work is really important. And like being interrupted by like chats and notifications all day long, like it's something that kills, productivity. And also I think just like your mental health as well. And of course, like, there's many studies done on this as well, like multitasking, being notified all day long, it's not good for productivity. It's not good for your mental health. So, yeah. And what we see is basically also like the current like culture is kind of like a real-time chat, getting notified, pinged all day long. You don't really know like if something is relevant to you or not. So it's really like a toxic environment, especially when we mix it with meetings. Some just like side effects of this that we have seen when you actually move into a more asynchronous culture. It's kind of like you move away from like this shallow communication. And the reason is like, when I respond in Twist, I don't really need to respond right away. And this means like when I'm ready to respond, I can kind of like think about stuff and then respond with something that's like of substance. And that's also something that we see is like communication becomes much richer. And this is also like important for asynchronous work. It's kind of like when you do deliver like a payload, which is basically like maybe like a message, that it should include like a lot of content and like a lot of context. Because if you just write, hello, and then like that does not really like do a lot. Like you should, write like hello. Could you look at this PR and then link to the PR or whatever it is that you want to take a look at. Another major thing is basically the time zones like don't become an issue. And in our like previous way, when we actually use a lot of Slack and a lot of meetings, it's like time zones were a problem because you need to synchronize them. And then you have like people like in Seattle, people in Europe, and then people like in Taiwan. Like, good luck picking like a time that does not mean that somebody needs to either like do it super early or super late at night. So that's also like another thing. And, what time zones, like eliminating time zones means it can hire the best people regardless of where they are. And this is, again, like a super, I think, competitive advantage for companies. You might think that this is actually a problem, but I think it's also like, it's a good thing because in an asynchronous first world, like, you need to make everything kind of transparent and accessible. And the reason is like, if you don't, then people will just get blocked. So for us, like what you see basically in a lot of like these asynchronous first companies like GitLab and us as well, is like kind of most of the stuff is transparent and available to everybody. So in Doist, like, like most of the leadership discussions, access to systems, access to code, like, to handbooks, like everything is just like available, searchable. So this means like people can usually unblock themselves. Like you don't need to ping, like somebody from IT to get, access to something. Like you just have it by default. That is something that I do a lot and that I take a lot of advantage of. Is based like if you work in an asynchronous first environment, you're the owner of the time and how you structure the days. So this means like you can kind of like time block You can just like work on something uninterrupted for like 2 or 3 hours. You can do lunches with friends without like feeling guilty that you have skipped like some important meeting or whatever. So really, like it's a whole different way to kind of like work, but also to live, because like you don't need to, a lot of people like they need to plan their life around their work. Like you can actually, plan both of these together, and then you're kind of like the master of these. And especially with kids, like having a super flexible schedule is like a super weapon. So, and that's it. Like, if you look also like at the retention stats inside asynchronous first organizations, I mean, they are like off the charts. Like for most of these companies that I mentioned, like most people stay, I think it's like over 90%. So just like for this, like I think our retention rate in the last like 10 years is like over 90%, probably over 95%. Like almost nobody leaves. That's kind of like also, I think, like counter to the current like team that you can't really build strong culture inside remote companies and blah, blah. Like, if you look at the stats, like you can build it. And actually, it's like much better than, for instance, even Google's retention rate. Like Google, I think, is like around 30 or 40%. So, like it's just like a magnitude better. And the reason is based like, when you give people all of these benefits, all of this flexibility, they can kind of, it's easier to be happy. And also if you combine it, with like great compensation and great perks, you really build like a great environment for work to happen. This is based like how we see the stack. And the way that we see the stack is basically like, you try to do as much stuff asynchronously as possible. It does not mean that you do everything. Like, sometimes it's okay to do like a meeting. It's okay to, do a real-time chat on Telegram if something is down and you really like need to be present. And then as well, like I think something that is super critical for remote companies, asynchronous companies as well, is like retreats, face-to-face meetings. Like we are humans, like we're not really robots. So, meeting and having a beer and having some good food, like it's a great way to bond. And like you definitely need that as well in a remote first, asynchronous first environment. So that is basically like a crash course of the stuff that I have learned over the years. Thank you a lot.
Evo imamo jedno pitanje, pa ću odmah njega postaviti. Znači Mario Mrkša, na engleskom je, pa možemo i na engleskom. Great presentation, Amir, with 100 people from more than 39 countries. There probably aren't many people from the company that hang out after work, or are there? You mentioned that you have experiments with smaller teams to meet together. Can you give us a few examples? And is that enough of social interaction that does not involve talking about work between your employees?
I mean, this is a great question, Mark. And like something we know is like most of our people, they don't live in the same city or even maybe in the same country. So, like hanging after work, like it's not really possible. And then something as well, I think like for people to actually thrive in a remote first, asynchronous first world, they actually need to create like social bonds outside of work. So, for us, like that's basically what we promote for people is kind of like, get some hobbies, get a life outside of work. Like your friends don't need to be like your work colleagues. And of course, like I think, this is maybe like, this is something that is problematic. Like it's very hard to actually do this in a remote first world. So, I think this may be an advantage of like, if you have everybody in a place, you can do these things. I would love personally to hang out with the people from the company after work, but I don't think this is possible. But the thing is like basically you need to have like in a remote world, like you need to have like a social life outside of work.
We have another question from Facebook. Hrvoje says, I'm aware that async work is based on trust and well-defined tasks, but I'm curious about the downsides you've experienced while switching to async, if there were any. By the way, Doist is a lifesaver for me, probably my favorite app.
Hvala puno. I mean, downsides. I think there are like some downsides to it, and I have also written about it. And I think actually, like the biggest downside is like the mental, mental issues, basically, because like we are not really wired, to to work like alone, and I think like the mental challenges are probably the biggest ones. So like isolation, and also you can really like build some really unhealthy habits. So I mean, for instance, like you can wake up at whatever time you want. You can get to bed, and then like that creates like these cycles where you maybe don't get out of the house either, because you can just work from home, and and then in the end, like you create like a really bad life for yourself. So I think that's probably like the biggest disadvantage. And the way that you combat it is basically like, again, like you need to have a life outside of work. Like you need to structure your days. You need to remember to have lunches with friends, go out, because like if you don't do that, then it's a pretty bad environment. Another thing you can do, and I know like some do it, and I have actually also done this before, like the whole kid situation, is like co-working spaces. So there's like amazing co-working spaces where you can basically go in and get like this office vibe. And then at least for me, it's actually much easier to block like work and life. So like, I go at work and then I'm in the co-working space and I can hang with people there. And then when I'm finished, I'm kind of done with work, and then I can kind of do my life. So honestly, like, it gives a lot of flexibility. So like even if you can't really do the home work and get that working, like it's maybe not bad, it's bad for you, then maybe try co-working space.
Okay. What were your unhealthy habits you developed, if there were any? I have learned a lot doing this. Like in my first, like I actually when I was 22, I co-founded a social network, and I kind of like I would work all the time, including weekends. So I have really tried like that, where in the end, like I actually achieved something, but like the cost was just like it was too big. Like it was really like I was almost burned out by doing that. So that's probably like one of my biggest lessons, is kind of like this, ambition and balance, and like, having a balanced work-life situation. And, like for me, like I love my work, I love what I do, so I can actually work all the time. But I know that if I do that, I would just be like super unhappy in the long run. So that's something that I've learned, and I still try to learn. I will not say that I'm perfect at it. Okay. We have another question from Facebook, from Nicola. What is your experience with younger colleagues who usually need more real-time help? How would you unblock them more easily, or would you allow some synchronous communication in these scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think like this is such a great question, because I think like onboarding of more junior people is definitely a problem in like remote first and asynchronous first environments. And I don't actually think we have solved this yet. I think like maybe I could just like give some examples, like maybe actually doing things more like synchronous, like for instance, pair programming if it's a developer, or even like bringing somebody in. Like what we actually do is like we have mentorships, and then you visit your mentor, and then you hang out with your mentor. Like that could also be a possibility. Or maybe like create, like if you're a bigger company, like create boot camps where people can hang out and like you kind of onboard people faster, and like they can kind of get into culture faster. But I still think that we're kind of struggling with the junior aspects, because the problem for junior people is like they will get stuck a lot of times, and if you're junior, like you can't really like unblock yourself. So that means like you can't really get stuff done, and then that creates like super frustrating experience. I would definitely say that you need like a different strategy for junior people, and like onboarding maybe as well.
We have a couple more questions. So Maya says, how do you hire and look for new employees? Can they choose the country where they will be working from?
Yeah, I mean, something new is like we have a Doist blog where we actually documented most of the stuff we have learned, including like how we hire people, how we onboard them, and etc. Just like tips on this. So I definitely check that out. Regarding your question, Maya, I mean, like it's asynchronous first, fully distributed. We don't really care where people are and like at what time you work. So that's basically like you can, and then you can also like move around. Like we have, people moving around. This said, this like nomadic, some years ago, like this nomadic lifestyle was kind of like in, but the thing is like, it's a super niche and most people, like if you look at the stats, like inside Doist or other companies, like most people actually prefer to stay where they are, where they may be with friends and family, and maybe even like some small places. Like, we have people in some islands, remote islands of the world. And, they're just happy there, working from there. They get a great salary and, they don't need to relocate to like super expensive city where they don't know anybody.
And another question from Mario. What about employee turnover? Is remote first affecting your company more than companies that are office first or office remote combination or not? Can you share some numbers and your thoughts on it?
I mean, like I said, like if you look at the retention rate, which is basically turnover, it's like some of the best in the industry, not only for like Doist, but like almost all of these like remote first, asynchronous first companies. So for Doist, like our retention rate in the last 10 years is like 95%. It means that, if you have like 100 people, only 5 people will leave in 10 years. And this is actually much better than like, even like some of the best tech companies in the world. So I really think like it's not really a huge problem. But of course, like the pandemic has also shifted things a lot because currently, like when we started to do this, like we were one of the few companies in the world that did like remote first asynchronous. Right now, there's like millions of companies, so competition has definitely like become fierce. So I mean, let's see how it goes with the retention rates.
And we have another question from Ljubica. What are the benefits of using your tool? What is the difference between working async and using tools as usual and using an async tool?
Yeah, this is a great question, Ljubica. I mean, something we have worked a lot, and we had a huge launch of Twist like 2 days ago. So you should definitely check it out. But basically, what you see in the normal companies, like you use 2 systems. You use like a chat system like Slack or Teams, and then you use email. And like these aren't like super connected to each other. So one thing that Twist does is kind of like, it's just one tool that serves both purposes. And then, it's like super modern. So like if you look at something like email, like email is a great tool for some things, but like internal communication, like isn't one of them, because in emails, like you can't really easily link to stuff. The threads, if you have new people joining, they can't really see past discussions that easily. So there's like a lot of problems with email. And then of course Slack, you can like configure it to asynchronous, but most of the patterns that I used is kind of like optimized toward chat. So that's kind of like, I think the benefit of like using something like Twist is that it's just like optimized for asynchronous, and the other tools aren't, and you can kind of like mold them, but like I don't think it will be the same as a tool that's kind of like super optimized for it.
Okay, and I have a last question for you. So no chat, really. I think a lot of us are really addicted to live chats. And can you give us some tips how to get rid of that addiction? Is that the first step towards async culture?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and that's the thing. It's kind of like some of these companies, what they've actually optimized for is kind of engagement and creating something that's addictive. But like cocaine is also like super fun and super addictive. But like you don't want to do cocaine. So like I think like definitely. So I think you can do like some things. You can do some configurations to kind of like make it less addictive. So for instance, like removing notifications from your phone, or even like removing them from your phone altogether, like that. those could be steps. But honestly, I would definitely recommend trying Twist out because I really think the tool is super important because the tools kind of shape us and promote or de-promote the communication style that's default.
Okay, and we are officially run out of our time. Thank you, Amir. This was really insightful, and I hope that some of our viewers will try the async communication or at least try to get rid of that addiction, cocaine or live chat, whatever your addiction is.